Welcome back to the latest word on Black News. I'm your host, Brittany Jones. So excited to be with you for another episode. And boy, do we have a lot in store for you. It's going to be a challenging week for Congress as they return home to face their constituents for spring break. And we've seen the arguments from both sides of concerned voters demanding their leaders fight back against the Trump administration. The number one question on folks' minds right now: what are Democrats going to do to combat the mess happening in Washington? And of course, we're zoning in on our Black leaders. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett had this to say during an interview with Brian Tyler Cohen. Take a listen.
And right now, we know that the Republicans don't care about the people that put them into position in the House. Instead, all they care about is making sure that they are in his good graces. They could care less about their constituents. And so I say, where they won't go, we as Democrats, we need to show up.
So here's the thing. Dr. Jonathan Collins, political science professor at Columbia University, is joining us now to talk about all of the things that she actually just said. Now, Dr. Collins, she actually has a point. Congresswoman Crockett definitely has been a voice that everybody is listening to at this point. And so these leaders were voted in office by the people and not by President Trump. We all know that. But voters have more leverage than they actually think, right? So what line of questions should concerned voters have right now, and what plan of action should Democrats be taking on the Hill?
I think they should continue the line of questioning that Congresswoman Crockett is putting in play here, which is like, how does the sum of the parts equal something that's actually good for us? Because, to her point, all we've seen is a lot of culture war politics. It's conversations about transgender folks and especially attacks on them. It's all this DEI conversation and trying to ensure that anything resolving race and equity and diversity and inclusion is stripped away. And there's nothing that's actually putting money in our pockets, nothing that's helping us actually survive through what is an incredibly dark economic time. I mean, to Representative Crockett's credit, if you look at her record, one of the things that she has sponsored is this bill that would expand a worker tax credit for folks who were displaced during natural disasters. She's also thinking about, she put together another congressional bill that would have expanded coverage for the Medicare program to include dental and vision. Like, she's thinking about people who are hurting right now. And I think the larger message is that the rest of Congress should be doing the same, and we should be demanding that.
Yeah, you made such a great point there, because that is the very thing that people are saying. Like, are these people really listening to us? Are they going to do what's actually best for the people? And a lot of people are feeling right now like that's not what these leaders are doing, whether you're Democrat or Republican at this point. So I think it was good for her to be able to point out that I am still doing the work for the people, because that's what we were elected for. So fast forward, town hall, Senator Raphael Warnock, who's also a reverend, he held a town.
Morehouse.
Yeah, you said shouts out to Morehouse. There you go. I see it. And so, obviously very familiar with the line of work that he is doing for his constituents. But yesterday he held a town hall and basically wanted to be able to hear from those concerned voters. He addressed those concerns during that virtual town hall. And of course, voters hit him with some very heated and direct questions about what is he doing? What are the other Democrats planning to do? And what is everybody who is in charge at this point planning to do with Doge, the mass firings, and then also Social Security as key concerns? So I want to play the soundbite for you, and then I'll get your reaction to that on the other end.
And it looks like they're cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. I'm for cutting waste, fraud, and abuse. And while Elon Musk is focused on waste, fraud, and abuse, he might address the fact that he has received some $38 billion, at least $38 billion in government subsidies, in government contracts, in tax credits. This is welfare in the worst way.
So, Dr. Collins, what do you think about that? What's your thoughts?
I think he has an incredibly important point, which is that we should be focusing on what government is going to do to improve people's lives. Everything that's happening right now with Elon Musk and Doge, I think, the the important question kind of hides in plain sight and nobody seems to be asking it. And I think Warnock is responding to that question though. And the question is, how does this matter? Like, you're telling me that you're doing all of these government spending cuts, you're firing all these people, like you're going to make government more lean and efficient. But like, to what ends? Like, how does this make anybody's life materially better? What problems are being solved just by making cuts? If this ultimately lands us in a more prosperous and a more equitable and a more equal American society, then okay. But you're not giving us a vision on how it gets there. All you're telling us is that there's too much waste and things need to be cut. And if anything, it looks more of like an excuse to operate a political agenda because you're targeting agencies and areas that have been very popular amongst Democrats. So this isn't an attempt to just cut spending. This is an attempt to disempower your opposition. And that's not governing, that's war. And so I'm glad that Warnock is starting this conversation.
So when you even kind of take a step aside, right, and you look at like there are so many voters, like even on the Democratic side, that are like, y'all aren't doing enough, y'all aren't being vocal enough, you're not speaking to the things that we're suffering from at this point. And so even though with him hosting the town hall yesterday, and like I mentioned, him getting the direct line of questions from people who are just downright frustrated, it's what do they do from here if voters are still saying like y'all are being too quiet, you're not speaking up enough?
Well, I think what Warnock is doing is a step in the right direction,
Yeah.
but I do think that this is a moment where the Democrats do need to get more creative with how they engage with people.
Mhm.
Like having a virtual town hall, like again, that's a good step, but I really want to see the Democrats out touching the people. I want to see them out actually connecting with everyday folks, showing that they are understanding the needs, especially of everyday Black folks, working class folks, working honest, hard jobs, 9 to 5, struggling, multiple kids, responsibilities, like the folks whose lives are incredibly hard right now. Show us that you're really connecting with them and you're working to craft a plan for the future that is going to respond to what's happening right now. And everything right now feels like it's social media, it's internet, it's YouTube, it's broadcasted, but nothing feels authentic and nothing feels like tightly connected to the people who really need it.
Do you think that's the case across the board too for Black people who are tuning in to listen to these Black leaders like Congresswoman Crockett and then also Warnock, as we just mentioned?
Well, I think that's what leadership does. Like, leadership initiates this. It's not our responsibility
Mhm.
to go up to Washington and then demand that leaders, have genuine conversations with us. They're the ones who ask for our votes. And with that comes a responsibility. One of the things that I've never loved about electoral politics is how, this time of year, and especially this time during a term, you never see a politician. But as soon as we get a year, 6 months, 3 months from an election, all of a sudden there are rallies, they're knocking on your door, they're calling your phone, they're texting you, they're emailing you. They won't leave you alone.
Mhm.
Keep that same energy. Where is it now? This is the time to actually build alliances and build a reputation, to build a movement around connecting with Black folks on a very genuine level. And in these moments, we can't find y'all.
Mhm. I mean, and you're talking about connecting. So some would argue that Representative Al Green is the one who is connecting with the people. He like, hey, I'm down for my folks. I'm standing up for what I believe in, and he has been very vocal about that. So let's talk about the censure of Representative Al Green. So we all watched during Trump's, I believe it was State of the Union message a couple weeks ago, and we saw him stand up and get put out by the sergeant. And that was his way of saying, hey, I'm taking a stand. And so, with 10 members of his own party actually siding with Republicans to censor him, voters want more Al Greens, more Jasmine Crockett, as we mentioned, and AOCs, and that's Alexandria Ocasio Cortez for the folks who don't know. That's kind of the nickname. Was it a wise move to go against Green during such a rocky time in this administration?
Well, I think both parties are gaining points for this.
Mhm.
And it kind of speaks more so to the deep division in our politics and how that doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. I think Trump supporters very much were pumping fists at the idea of removing Al Green from the chamber floor. And then I think Al Green supporters, especially Black Democrats, have also, been pumping the fist at the idea of standing up against what Trump had to say during his first sort of national address to the American public. The thing that I'm concerned with is whether or not there's more precision or there needs to be more precision in the purpose of the act. I don't think enough of us are talking about what Trump was saying in the moment when Al Green um, engaged in this kind of contestation. And the fact that people aren't focused on what was said in that moment seems to me to speak to the idea that there still is a lack of clarity on what the disagreement with Trump looks like and should look like. I think what we saw in the previous election was that this message of never Trump wasn't enough. That Black voters still supported Kamala Harris at high levels, but other voters of color, the never Trump idea, it was insufficient. And I think it's important now to really craft a message around what is it specifically about Trump
Mhm.
that is endemic to American society? And then how do you rally people around that? And so we need to move away from, yes, it was a great moment to see, it was empowering even to see Al Green stand up in that moment, but the message is way more important than the man. And I wanted to see more about the message.
So, what message do you think that sends to voters on both sides?
Well, that's the issue is that it was more of a symbolic gesture. So Al Green starts singing We Shall Overcome towards the very beginning of Trump's speech. Before he continues to roll out the agenda that he wants to communicate in that actual speech. And so the removal of Al Green was more of a general protest to the presence of Trump in this space as the president giving these remarks and less about specifics within Trump's agenda. And I think that that's dangerous just because I think voters are looking for what is it about Trump that we should be rallying around? Because you look up right now and there seems to be political contestation in the air. And there does seem to be a very mobilized but yet defeated Democratic Party. And yet, despite this feeling of distaste in mouth, nobody's marching. Nobody's standing up. People aren't showing up to protest. There was an attempt to have this like sort of protest of large businesses. It's unclear whether or not that was effective.
Hmm.
We're not seeing any of the political energy that resembles a movement against something that is happening that we should care deeply about. And a part of that is because just the messaging isn't being communicated very well. And so I love what Al Green did from a symbolic politics standpoint. But that is the question. What's the message here? What should we be taking home with us?
Yeah. And I'm curious of what's going to start that Black movement. Or will Black people say, I'm tired, just like we've heard, obviously, the rhetoric from I am a Black woman, from Black women saying, it ain't on our backs. We ain't doing this work no more, all of these things, because we've done our part. So, how do you think like this is just going to kind of reshape that narrative?
Well, that's the thing is if we don't get in front of it and create a message, or if leaders in particular don't create a very clear, streamlined message for us to rally around, then there's going to be something that happens that generates that momentum instead.
Mm.
And we saw it in the previous administration, the previous Trump administration, that is, those moments were Breonna Taylor,
Yes.
those George Floyd, it was Breonna Taylor. These were the literal loss of Black life
Mhm.
that created the momentum to stand up against the things that were happening with the Trump administration before. And so if there's not a message that forms, there's going to be a critical act. And I fear that it would take, if not a major endangerment to even the loss of Black life in order for that to happen.
Because you brought this up about George Floyd, it made me think about just, recently they're forcing, I believe her name is Mayor Bowser of DC. Is that correct?
Muriel Bowser, yeah.
Yes, and they're forcing her to take Black Lives Matter, the words off of the plaza, which had been renamed, obviously, what, 5 years ago in honor of George Floyd. And so, what do you think about that? Because when you start to see those types of things happening, what type of message is that sending to Black America underneath this Trump administration?
Well, it's sending the message that the things that symbolize Black freedom and Black progress, they don't matter. It's complete irony to the idea, the message that Black lives matter. You're actually telling us by removing this that you don't think Black lives matter in any particular way that should be recognized and celebrated. You know, this is the same country that has placed and built statues of Confederate leaders that have stood on the doorsteps, really, of our state houses and places of state policymaking for decades. This is a place that has honored and revered some of the most vile white supremacists that have ever stepped foot on the American soil. And so the idea of removing a symbol of the sort of most recent rendition of the Black freedom movement, I would call the Black Lives Matter movement, the idea of removing a symbol from that, it's terrifying. You know, again, it sends the message that our history shouldn't be acknowledged and our presence shouldn't be respected.
Mm. Yeah, that's a mouthful right there. And just, I don't know, it's a little bit hard to digest. But, for us, that's why we have to do the jobs that we do. You as a political science professor, me as a journalist, and telling the stories of our people so people get a better understanding of what's happening so they don't feel like they don't have a voice. Because a lot of times these things that we're seeing make people feel like, I just want to give up and I don't care because they don't care. So we will definitely continue to cover all of these things that are happening, especially having you as a voice here on the latest word on Black news has been just tremendous for us, and you dropping gems for us as well. So thank you for your time again.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
And again, many thanks to Dr. Jonathan Collins, political science professor from Columbia University, always giving us the gems and keeping us informed. So, with Dems hosting their quote, fighting back tours across the country, we'll be watching to see how those work out for them and continuing to explore the power of accountability for Black America. So, for you folks at home, feel free to weigh in on the topics that we're covering. We want to hear from you. We want to know what you think about what's happening within the current administration. That's both Democrats and Republicans. And we'll be sure to follow up with those issues and covering those issues for you because we are following Trump's first 100 days. So stay tuned. And until next time, take care.